Hi there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The Jedi and Mandalorians are storied enemies. They're almost as bitter rivals as the Sith and Jedi. When you have such bitter rivalries like this in our own world, it's usually the result of some kind of huge gap in ideology mixed with tribal behavior. Unfortunately, when you have these kind of relationships, reconciliation is quite hard between these types of groups, and it takes very special individuals to look past all of this nonsense. Now, in the second season of The Mandalorian, it is possible that Din Djarin will run into a Jedi during his journey. He has been tasked with returning Baby Yoda to one of these wizards so that he can be trained in the way of the Force. Given the hostile relationship between Jedi and Mandalorians throughout the course of history, it's very possible that Din Djarin will ultimately end up fighting a Jedi. The question is, will he succeed in defeating or even killing a Jedi? Does Din Djarin possess the tools, abilities, and skills? When Mandalore the Conqueror started the first intergalactic Mandalorian crusade, his people had yet to meet a rival or enemy that they could not defeat. The Mandalorians prided themselves as being the best warriors in the entire galaxy. This pride has led them down dark and dangerous roads numerous times as a people, but at the same time it motivates them to be the best of the best when it comes to fighting. When the Mandalorians encountered the Jedi several thousand years later, they were shocked by the abilities of these wizards. And that's because the Force kind of remained a mystery to the Mandalorians. There, of course, have been Mandalorians with the Force and Mandalorian scientists who tried to dissect what the Force was, but more or less, the Mandalorians had very few counters against the Jedi's Force abilities and superhuman powers. And so Mandalore the Indomitable was dominated by Ulic Qel-Droma, and Mandalore the Ultimate was ultimately defeated by Revan. And so in both canon and in Legends, the Jedi were basically the only thing standing in between the Mandalorians and galactic conquest. Which is why both groups began to hate each other so much. For the Jedi, the Mandalorians' love of war, death, and destruction was a clear sign of their dark side, as was the Mandalorians' various alliances with the Sith. Although in reality, it was more like the Sith were manipulating the Mandalorians for their own gain rather than being good allies towards them. In 738 BBY, the Jedi ultimately decided that the Mandalorians were such a great threat that they led a preemptive Republic strike against their home planet. This event would be known as the Mandalorian Excision, and it would become one of the bloodiest massacres during the quite peaceful golden era of the Republic and Jedi Order. Basically, a giant Jedi-led judicial and planetary security force fleet entered the Mandalorian system, and they started attacking all the planets, and they bombarded Mandalore from orbit, turning the planet into a wasteland covered in just dirt and sand. It was an extremely cruel action by the Jedi and the Republic. The only thing the Mandalorians had done at this point was refuse to join the Republic. The Mandalorians actually were in the process of rebuilding their society and were making rapid advances in technology and commerce, which made the Jedi nervous. And so now all that is left of life on Mandalore are a few domed cities that heavily depend on imports of basic goods to survive. The Mandalorians' response to the Jedi threat was a bit more calculating and practical. They realized that in order to compete with a super being, they also had to enhance their own abilities with technologies and various tools. And so at the core of any Mandalorian's arsenal was his suit of bes'kar. Throughout the course of Mandalorian history, the bes'kar armor was viewed as the pinnacle in defensive technology. These suits of armor were worth fortunes and oftentimes passed down from one family member to another and carefully maintained and repaired after each engagement. In many ways, the suits and helmets were what really unified this very diverse group of individuals, and so the suits were very much a part of their culture as well. What made the armor so strong was the material it was made from, bes'kar, or Mandalorian iron. This raw metal only came from the Mandalorian system, and only the Mandalorian smiths knew the secrets of refining bes'kar and turning it into a super strong alloy that could be used in armor. A good suit of bes'kar can turn away multiple blast rounds and even stop a sniper round at distance. More importantly, bes'kar was lightsaber resistant and bought the wearer some time when fighting a Jedi, although the limbs of the suit were still quite vulnerable to attack. When fighting a Jedi, the biggest disadvantage, especially for an individual wearing a heavy suit of armor, is their lack of mobility and agility when compared to a Jedi. A Jedi with enhanced speed can move lightning quick and in a very superhuman way. And because Jedi are almost all close-range melee fighters, the Mandalorian strategy will always be to keep some distance between themselves and the Jedi. This is why so many Mandalorians would eventually add jetpacks to their suits. This gave a normal human being close to the same type of maneuverability a Jedi had. It also gave the Mandalorian the ability to create space and retreat whenever Jedi gets too close with their laser sword. Now, the Mandalorians really loved hand-to-hand combat and melee combat, but they were also a very practical people when it came to warfare. There was no tradition that was too sacred to be broken as long as it gave a Mandalorian advantage in a fight. And so the Mandalorians heavily focused on increasing their ranged abilities. Now, they understood that blasters could be deflected back towards them by a Jedi, so they looked into other types of ranged munitions, like rockets, which had area damage and were impossible to deflect. You also had slug throwers, which used metallic rounds that were solid and could also not be deflected by a lightsaber. As a matter of fact, if you hit a slug thrower around with a lightsaber, it would just kind of melt into molten slag, which would just hit you in the face. It's a very bad situation for the Jedi. There were also other types of blasters like scatter guns that fired wide shotgun-like patterns of energy bolts, and Gatling guns which had extremely high rates of sustained fire. Now, both of these types of weapons were pretty hard to block with a single lightsaber. And if a Jedi does happen to get extremely close, your last resort weapon would be a flamethrower, which also is very difficult to block with a lightsaber. You also had other small gadgets like a grappling hook that you could tangle up a Jedi with, along with whistling birds, which were a devastating smart cluster munition that could take out an entire room of people without warning. And so while the Mandalorians did not have the same natural gifts as the Jedi, they came to the battle well prepared with all the tools necessary to defeat a Jedi. And Din Djarin is certainly as well armed as they get, especially after he gets that Baby Yoda contract credit. Now, we've talked a lot about the cool weapons and gadgets the Mandalorians have at their disposal. But how many Mandalorians have ever bested the Jedi in combat, and how did they do it? Well, we know that more than a few Jedi have been killed by Mandalorians in combat, especially during the Mandalorian Wars and the early Mandalorian Crusades. But the most prolific killer of Jedi would be the Mandalorian known as Jango Fett. The famous bounty hunter was able to kill several Jedi with his bare hands during the Battle of Galadron. It's really unknown how Jango Fett was able to do this. He didn't have any special tools or weapons at his disposal. He literally used his own reflexes and physical strength to kill Jedi with his bare hands. This is especially impressive because we know that the Jedi have the ability to perceive incoming attacks, so they basically can see a punch before an individual even throws it. Jango Fett obviously wasn't a superhuman. The clones that were based off his genetic material were fallible. Jango Fett was able to kill Coleman Trebor, a master in the defensive arts of lightsaber combat at close range, with dual-wielded blasters, showing us that rapid fire at close ranges can overwhelm even the most skilled dinosaurs. From what we can tell, Din Djarin is most likely not as skilled as Jango Fett, which isn't saying much because probably a significant portion of the galaxy's beings are less skilled in combat than Jango Fett. But based on his combat experience, he seems to be very competent against the average Cantina thug, but when facing multiple opponents or very strong or butch single opponents, Din Djarin struggles and usually relies on backup. For a Mandalorian bounty hunter, he sure has a lot of friends, which isn't usually the most common thing. This might just be a realistic stance that Din Djarin takes in order to increase his own survivability, which also is a strength. Also, while Jango Fett was able to dispatch Coleman Trebor relatively easy, he struggled against Mace Windu, especially after his jetpack failed to create the distance that most Mandalorians need to defeat a Jedi. This means that who Din Djarin fights is going to be very important. If he's going up against someone as skilled as Ahsoka Tano, I doubt he'll stand much of a chance against her. But if it's some older Jedi who's just been hiding for a long time and not necessarily skilled in combat, Din Djarin does have a chance of defeating and killing a Jedi. Now let me know in the comment section below what you think about Din Djarin's chances of encountering a Jedi and whether he will defeat them or not. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.